Yo, what is up guys, Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this is a quick preview and prediction for Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. Of course this fight goes down on the 8th of October, takes place at the O2 Arena in London, and in the UK it will be on DAZN pay-per-view, and I'd imagine in the USA, just regular DAZN. Now, this fight is what it is in my opinion. It's essentially a cash grab for both men. From Conor Benn's perspective, if he were to lose this fight, the narrative will be, well, he moved up in weight, he was fighting a much bigger man, daring to be great. We know the Matchroom PR spin by this point in time, and he will go back down to 147. And as for Chris Eubank Jr., yes, he's depleting himself, but I think he sees this as easy money. I don't think he particularly rates Conor Benn, and, you know, given his size advantage, despite dehydrating himself, I still believe that he doesn't see Conor Benn as much of a threat, and from his perspective, it's basically a high-paid cherry pick. Now, we will see how that pans out with the, rehydration clause and catch weight. But yeah, I mean, it's a big fight. No doubt about it. People are interested. I think it will do good numbers on pay-per-view. But is it a great fight? Not really, in my opinion. This is, there's going to be the flashing lights, the hype, but I don't think it's necessarily a great fight. I mean, when you have to dehydrate somebody to make it more of an even playing field, that really should tell you all you need to know. But yeah, and that's really my only big concern going into this fight. And yeah, that is the weight of Chris Eubank Jr. and how much he will be depleted on fight night. Obviously, it's a 157 catch weight, and the rehydration clause is around £10, according to Eddie Hearn. When he says that, I'd assume that means £10 on the dot, to be honest with you. So yeah, I mean, that has to be considered. Rehydration clauses are there for a reason, and they are used by the A side to deplete the B side. And let's be honest here, Conor Benn is the guy who is younger, he's the up-and-comer, he's the guy in which I would imagine the boxing world wants to win, because there's a lot more future paydays with Conor Benn. Chris Eubank Jr. now is, 33 years old? So you have to take that into account. No doubt about it. But despite all of that, Chris Eubank Jr. is still a favourite in this fight. But let's briefly break down the tale of the tape. Chris Eubank Jr. has a record of 32 wins, 2 defeats, 0 draws, 23 of those 32 wins coming by way of knockout, and of course those 2 losses coming to George Groves and Billy Joe Saunders. Conor Benn has a record of 21-0 with 0 draws, 14 of his 21 wins coming by way of knockout. Chris Eubank Jr. is listed as 5'11" with a 72.5-inch reach, whereas Conor Benn is listed as 5'8" with a 68-inch reach. So Eubank Jr. is significantly taller and longer. He's got a 4.5-inch reach advantage and a 3-inch height advantage. Of course, both of these guys are orthodox fighters. Chris Eubank Jr. is 33 years old, whereas Conor Benn is 26 years old. So Conor Benn does have the advantage of youth in this fight. I would say he's the fresher guy. I know Eubank Jr. hasn't been through too many wars, but he has had a few injuries over the years. So Conor Benn definitely has more in the tank. But obviously Chris Eubank Jr. is more experienced, he's had more fights, and he's fought better competition than Conor Benn. The likes of George Groves, Billy Joe Saunders, Arthur Abraham, James DeGale, etc. So yeah, Eubank definitely has the experience edge in this fight. And obviously all of these guys are bigger, significantly bigger than Conor Benn. In regards to the fight and what I believe each guy should do, I guess we'll start with Conor Benn here. When Conor Benn turned pro, I really wasn't impressed with him. He looked relatively athletically gifted, quite explosive, quite powerful, but technically he was awful. Since his pro debut back in, 2016, I have to say Conor Benn has made a lot of improvements in his style. He's really tightened up his stance. He's a lot more compact now, throws really good, crisp, short punches, and he throws his punches pretty well technically, actually. He turns his shots over. He can put shots together quite well. Conor Benn, in my opinion, is best when he is pushing a fight, when he is throwing combinations, and he's actually improved on his counterpunch ability as well. So Conor Benn, in recent years, he has been showing signs of improvement. And in this fight against Chris Eubank Jr., I think Conor Benn needs to approach it quite aggressively early on, actually. Try to take something out of Chris Eubank Jr. Bear in mind that Eubank Jr. Is going through the catch weight and rehydration clause. Conor Benn is actually a pretty good body puncher when he focuses down there. So I want to see Conor Benn approach this in that compact stance, high guard, bobbing and weaving and coming forwards, throwing the jab, trying to slip the jab of Eubank Jr., and getting underneath Eubank's punches, closing the distance quickly to try and work up close. Work that body, come through the middle with uppercuts, and even at times try to exchange with Chris Eubank Jr. One thing about Eubank Jr., and he's never really been brutally exposed for, he hasn't been brutally exposed for it, but in the exchanges, sometimes Chris Eubank Jr. really swings wildly when he's throwing wide shots. He's good at throwing uppercuts up close, Chris Eubank Jr., but every other shot, he'll kind of throw himself off balance, his chin's in the air, and if Conor Benn can exchange with Chris Eubank Jr. in these moments, his shorter, more technically correct shots could actually get to the target first. Having said that, I think Conor Benn needs to be very wary of staying in the pocket too long against Chris Eubank Jr. because Eubank Jr., despite the fact that he will be depleted somewhat, he is still the bigger man. He's going to be the stronger man, I would imagine. And those uppercuts up close are dangerous. So Conor Benn needs to be very aware to when to get out of the pocket, land your combination, maybe try to start an exchange, but don't stay there too long. Get out, make Eubank Jr. reset yourself, and go again. If Conor Benn goes for this like toe-to-toe early on, that's when he could get caught, he could get hurt, he could get knocked out. So for me, it's about pressure fighting for Conor Benn, but pressure fighting in bursts, I would say. Nice and explosive, get out, reset, and in the meantime try to avoid Chris Eubank Jr.'s long shots from distance, maintain that head movement. Conor Benn does actually have quite good head movement when he wants to use it. When he doesn't respect an opponent, it does kind of go out the window. But I've seen Conor Benn use nice head movement, dipping to the side, slipping the jab. He needs to be doing that on the outside against Chris Eubank Jr., making himself a hard target, a real small, compact target for those straight punches. Try to avoid them as much as he can. And also he needs to be wary, obviously, when he is coming in, not to make any defensive lapses. In particular, he needs to keep that right hand glued to his chin. Because one thing about Chris Eubank Jr., he has a very sneaky check left hook. It doesn't always look powerful, but he can catch a guy unawares, like it did with Liam Williams. And that scored a couple of knockdowns against Liam Williams. Conor Benn needs to be aware of that kind of... Eubank Jr. will kind of disguise it as a jab, but he'll quickly turn it into a check left. So he needs to be very wary of that shot. Conor Benn does get headstrong at times, and he needs to tighten that up going into this fight. He needs to tighten it up. I would say Conor Benn needs to approach this fight as a pressure fighter, but with relative caution. Fight in bursts, get in, get out, and slowly try to break Eubank Jr. down. Again, I don't think it would be wise for him to go in there and really put it on Eubank from the start. Basically do that for a few rounds and then try to evolve that style as like the aggressive counterpuncher. As I was mentioning, Eubank in the exchanges does get wild, and if Conor Benn is close enough to him, at mid-range, or well, more precisely in the pocket, then his shorter, more compact shots could actually win the exchanges against Chris Eubank Jr. So as the fight goes on, I would say, it all depends on how it's going, right? If he's taking punishment early on, then yeah, Conor Benn needs to reset his strategy. But if he does what I say and he has success early on and wins rounds, I would then kind of morph that game plan, again the same sort of thing, but focus more on the counters up close and at mid-range. Try to engage Eubank in the exchanges a little bit more and try to counter him, and again maintain that body assault. Because honestly, if he tries to engage Chris Eubank Jr. in a boxing match from range, I don't believe Conor Benn's got the attributes to win that sort of fight. Not that Chris Eubank Jr. is necessarily a great boxer, because I don't believe he is, but he's much longer, he's much taller, and in a battle of straight punches on the outside, I don't see Conor Benn winning that fight, especially considering Eubank's feet are quite fast when he's backpedaling. And if he engages Chris in that sort of fight, when he's tip-tapping and boxing, I think that's when he could actually walk into a big straight right or that check left hook of Eubank Jr. So for me, Conor Benn needs to force this fight. He needs to be the aggressor. He needs to get up close, work inside. And as the fight goes into the later rounds, that is when Conor Benn should try to start countering and exchanging more with Eubank Jr. Honestly, it needs to be like an in and out approach, kind of like Pacquiao against Antonio Margarito. Obviously, Pacquiao did a lot different to what I'm explaining that Conor Benn should do, but in that sort of mould, in and out, be the buzzsaw, maintain that high work rate, but don't get too greedy. And I think that would be the motto for Conor Benn going into this fight. Don't get too greedy, because again, Eubank's a bigger man, he's faster. I would say that Chris Eubank Jr. is the hardest puncher that Conor Benn has fought, so we haven't got a clue how he takes those shots, especially at 157. But yeah, for me, Conor Benn is quite simple in this fight. I don't see him winning a boxing match. He needs to engage Eubank Jr., smother him up close, get those combinations off, rinse and repeat, basically. As for Chris Eubank Jr., I think this would suit him if Chris Eubank Jr. made this a boxing match and ultimately kept Conor Benn at range for as long as possible. I'm not really convinced that Conor is that great on the outside. Conor Benn, to me, is more effective at mid-range and up close. That's where he gets his best work off, his power shots, those short punches, his uppercut as well. He likes to be fighting relatively up close. However, from range, jab for jab, I'm not really sure that Conor Benn can prevail in that sort of fight. So if I'm Chris Eubank Jr., particularly early on, I would try and keep this fight at a distance, similar to how he approached some of the rounds in the Liam Williams fight. Keep prodding and probing with that lead hand, change the levels with that jab. Eubank Jr. has a pretty quick jab from the waist with that low lead hand, and on the outside, I don't think that will be to Eubank's detriment to switch that lead hand up, throw that jab from low, throw it from a high guard, change the levels with it. I think he's got the foot speed and the reach to, mix that up with his lead hand, to keep Conor Benn guessing, essentially. Throw that jab from different areas, from different levels, from different angles, double it up, feint the jab, and throw that sweeping left hook, which Chris Eubank Jr. likes to throw. I think that could be an effective shot against Conor Benn, because sometimes Conor Benn, he'll like to put those earmuffs up, that high guard when he's approaching, and that left hook around the side, that sweeping left hook, could get around the side of Conor Benn's guard, especially considering Eubank has longer reach, so he can throw it from a distance and maybe catch Conor Benn. But early on, if I'm Eubank Jr., my initial goal would be to try to lower the pace and make it a bit of a boxing match, and obviously try to frustrate Conor Benn. One thing about Conor Benn that I'm not really convinced by as of yet is his in-ring discipline and temperament. What I mean by that is when things are going wrong, is he going to fall apart? Is he going to lose his shape, get desperate? He he kind of reminds me of that sort of character. We've not really seen it yet because Conor Benn's had it all his own way, but I'd be asking that question if I was Chris Eubank Jr. And if Conor Benn does react in that way, that is when Eubank Jr. can start implementing those counter punches, that quick straight right hand, which he can throw. Try to walk Conor Benn onto those stinging sort of quick shots. Essentially, try to take advantage of Conor Benn's inexperience and his over exuberance, I would say, and then go from there. Essentially, as the fight plays out, if Eubank approaches it in that way, I don't think he'll necessarily be hurting Conor Benn, but yeah, I do believe he'll be frustrating Conor Benn, and yeah, Conor's going to get more and more desperate, and again, that is where the counterpunch opportunities come in. The only issue with that sort of game plan, when you're moving your feet, you're throwing feints, you're doubling the jab, you're keeping distance. The only issue is for Eubank Jr. potentially doing that for 12 rounds when he's depleted might not be the easiest of tasks. So there may be times in this fight where Chris Eubank Jr. needs to hold his feet, maybe against the ropes where he's sliding and rolling and standing his ground with Conor Benn. And I wouldn't be too worried about Eubank in those moments, but if I'm Chris Eubank Jr., I'm not going to try and hook with Conor Benn. I would stick with I would stick with the uppercuts through the middle, to be honest. Maybe little short hooks to the body, but don't trade hooks with Conor Benn to the head, because I think Conor's punches are more compact, and in those exchanges, Conor could get the best of it. So when Eubank Jr. is forced to exchange, try to keep it tighter. Try to, throw the uppercuts through the middle, maybe the little short right hand over the top, but don't try and hook with Conor Benn, because I think he might get outscored in those exchanges. And who knows, maybe even get hurt because of the weight clause. If Eubank Jr. is fit, I think he can afford to take liberties, but given what we know going into this fight, I don't think it's wise to, just in case he is depleted. And yeah, I would try to slowly break down Conor Benn, and also when you're on the outside, try to concentrate on the body of Conor Benn. He himself is carrying more weight. Now, that may mean that Conor Benn is stronger, got more stamina, but who knows, maybe he doesn't carry that weight well. Maybe he's put the weight on in the wrong way. So when I'm boxing from range, I want to see Eubank Jr. fire that straight right hand to the body, throw the jab to the body, to the solar plexus, to the chest. Try to pick away at Conor Benn's gas tank. They may not appear much, these sort of straight shots to the body, but they soon add up if you are accurate enough and consistent enough with those shots. And again, I think Chris has the agility to do that, particularly with the jab, because when he jabs to the body, he won't really kind of fall in with the jab, he'll step to the side. So it's going to be hard for Conor Benn to counter the jab to the body. If he throws the straight right to the body, that is when Conor Benn can counter him, so he needs to be aware of that. But ultimately, yeah, I think given what Eubank Jr. is going through to make the weight, he needs to be more cautious early on, try to box, try to win the rounds, and essentially make Conor, frustrate Conor, make Conor desperate, and then go from there. And depending on how his gas tank is in the second half of this fight, that is when we may see the Eubank Jr. of old, when he's standing there throwing combinations up close, particularly with the uppercuts, and he's really going through the gears. That's what I want to see from Chris Eubank Jr. I think he would be best advised to treat this fight as a slow burn. If he goes out there and tries to blast Conor out early, which could happen, that could happen, who knows. But if he tries that and he doesn't get Conor Benn out of there, then his stamina down the stretch could be in question. So I would try to avoid that if I was Chris Eubank Jr. But ultimately, listen, this fight essentially, in my opinion, is a battle between an unproven welterweight and a fringe world level middleweight. Conor Benn's definitely got better, as I've said, but ultimately he is still unproven, and he's stepping up in weight here. And again, if you matched these two guys together and there was no weight stipulations, I think we would all agree that Eubank Jr. wins comfortably. The only thing giving anybody doubt is the weight clause. I think Eubank Jr. will be somewhat affected, but ultimately not enough for him to lose this fight. I think he'll win this fight. Conor Benn may have some moments. I think he will have moments, actually, particularly in the pocket. But ultimately, I think Chris Eubank Jr. wins this fight. I think he slowly dissects Conor Benn, keeps him from range early on, frustrates him. Conor Benn will start taking more risks. He'll get some of his own shots off, which will excite the crowd. But ultimately, I think Eubank Jr. will be chopping away at Conor Benn with his own power shots. And eventually you'll see a late stoppage in this fight. I would say a second half stoppage. I think it could occur at any point in the second half of this fight. But I've got Chris Eubank Jr. by stoppage, second half of the fight. What about you guys? How do you see this fight playing out? It's interesting, you know, we are fight week now, and I am starting to see a bit more hype surrounding this fight. But I have to be honest, I know I've done like a 20-minute video, but I'm not really feeling it. To me, it just seems like a cynical cash grab, if I'm being honest. Am I going to pay for this fight? No. Will I watch it? Yes. But it is what it is. People are excited. Who am I to piss on their parade, as they say? But yeah, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Delboy. Peace.